What's up, everybody? Welcome back into the Lettermen Row studios, and we have a very special guest on the other side of that screen. That is On3's Andy Staples, maybe the newest employee of On3, one of the biggest acquisitions of the network so far. He's here to talk about the Buckeyes. Andy, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. I don't know about biggest. There's some pretty big acquisitions, and it sounds like there's more coming. So I don't know if I'm gonna be the newest for long.
You're about to release a show, Andy. Andy Staples On3, I believe, on all podcast platforms. Go ahead and plug that before we get started, just so that people know where to
Yes.
find you.
So our first show will record Monday, July 17th. It'll premiere on YouTube at 8 p.m. Eastern time on the On3 YouTube channel, and then it'll be uploaded to every podcast platform. So basically what we're going to have for you is a Monday through Friday show if you're listening in podcast form. And then if you want to watch it live, which we would love if you wanted to do that and interact with the show and do that, Sunday through Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. And I'll let you know when we're actually doing it live. We're going to do that several times a week and as often as we can, because I like it when we can react to news as it's happening and people can interact with the show. You guys have the best ideas for the show, the listeners, the viewers. And so I'm really excited about that. And this is a whole different crew. This is a big reach that On3 has. So I'm excited to have some new people coming to the show.
Yeah, it'll be awesome. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm sure the Buckeyes will be a heavy topic on there, especially as the season gets started.
Oh yeah, yeah. Little angst. I don't know. I want to ask you this, Spencer, because it's interesting to me because going into the Peach Bowl, it felt like from the Ohio State perspective, the world was ending. They had just lost twice in a row to Michigan. Michigan's in the playoff again. They're two-time defending Big Ten champs, but then Ohio State comes within an eyelash of beating Georgia. And I think we can probably surmise that if Ohio State had beaten Georgia, they'd be the defending national champs right now. I think they would have beaten TCU in the national title game. So where did everybody get after that? I know they don't feel like the world's ending anymore, but where are they after that?
Yeah, it's interesting because you go 0-2 with CJ Stroud. And I think that's the big thing is like you don't just go 0-2 against Michigan, but you go 0-2 with CJ Stroud, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Although he didn't play in the 2022 game, you're 0-1 with Marvin Harrison. You're breaking in a new quarterback. And so the angst is still there, but I think it's a little bit of a different tenor of angst of just like, okay, where is the program going? Not just like, how do we beat Michigan here? The Peach Bowl was the saving grace of this program, though, because if they don't go into the Peach Bowl, and if they don't hang with Georgia and almost beat Georgia, let's say they go back to the Rose Bowl and maybe beat Utah again, I still don't think you're as optimistic right now about this program as you are, knowing that you can hang with that level of a program at Georgia, and then you take the recruiting momentum that's going on now too. So I don't know if anybody's really gone anywhere other than optimistic. I think that's probably the best way to put it. But also, there's the angst, and that's kind of why I brought you on here. Is like we talk about Ohio State from the Ohio State perspective every day, but we don't get it from the national perspective maybe as often as we should. And so maybe flipping the question right back onto you, like where do you see the program right now because of after Georgia feels a lot different than maybe on December 1st after the Michigan game?
So I see it as one of the best in the country. I see it as one of the few that has the kind of talent that can win national titles and compete for national titles on a year in, year out basis. They're just not putting it all together in the same way that Georgia is, or that Alabama did, or that Clemson did. And that's the issue. And I'm not sure what the cause is. I'm not sure if it's they're just not challenged really until they get to the Michigan game. And so I had a commenter on my old show, and I wish I had this person's real name, but the commenter's YouTube name was OhNo224. Best summation of Ohio State and Michigan that I have seen. And it is basically Ohio State is built to hang 50 on Michigan State, and Michigan is built to beat Ohio State. And that's the difference. But the thing is, the way Ohio State is built, it actually feels like they're built to better compete in a 12-team playoff than, say, Michigan. But in the styles make fights situation, they are not built to compete as well against Michigan in November in either Columbus or Ann Arbor. And that's the problem. And listen, you can say this is a national title contender, and they are. You can say that they have some of the best talent in the country, and they do. They do have to resume beating Michigan, or at least make it every other year kind of thing, or it's going to be a problem. Like even though the format's changing, it's going to be a problem.
Well, and I've even said that you might see in the future with divisions being scrapped, Ohio State may lose the last week of November to Michigan.
And then beat them the next time.
But if you go into a dome and you get this team on a fast track, I don't think Michigan's winning that game, and that's not an excuse making. It's the way that these two teams are built.
But think about everybody who grew up an Ohio State fan. Think about how insulting that feels to them. Well, if we get them in a dome, if we get them in a controlled environment with 72 degrees and perfect turf, then we can beat them. Like, I guarantee you that like AJ Hawk hears that and he's like, no, that's not supposed to be the way it is at Ohio State.
Well, I think about James Laurinaitis, who's on staff. I think about Brian Hartline, who, those guys have played in that game. Tim Hinton was the former tight ends coach, who's still a support staff member, who's watched those brutal, cold Ohio State Michigan games where Ohio State, just body blows Michigan to death.
Yeah.
And now you look at it and the script's almost been flipped. I think the Michigan State and Michigan thing is a good way to put it. I'm glad that you brought that up. I also think that it's fair for Michigan to be the Big Ten favorite while Ohio State has the better title odds, which is just crazy to me. But
people can't wrap their brains around that. But it is totally a styles make fights thing. Michigan is built to beat Ohio State in November. Now, here's the thing about Michigan. I saw that Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl put this out today, and I thought it was really interesting. He was putting out how many legit NFL prospects Michigan has on its offensive line. And it's more than 5, which is a really good thing for a team. Their secondary's very similar. Their talent level at the period where the guys are playing, I'm not talking about when they're signing, but the talent level at the period when the teams are actually meeting on the field and the players are where they are, where the juniors, seniors, feels like that gap is closed considerably. That when Harbaugh made those staff changes, they started signing here and there the 5-star type guys, JJ McCarthy, Donovan Edwards, those guys, but also they're developing guys into NFL talent. And so when they are playing Ohio State, now they have a much closer amount to Ohio State of NFL talent when they play. And I think that's changed the dynamics of it too.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the thoughts that I've had is the development is where you've seen maybe the lack of head coaching experience from Ryan Day. Whereas Jim Harbaugh has been to a Super Bowl. He won games of consequence. Yeah. I mean, San Diego, like being able to win at all of those different stops have helped that coaching tree, and he knows who to go hire. He knows who to put around him. Whereas, Ryan Day hired Al Washington, and that was an okay hire, but it didn't work out, I think, the way Ohio State kind of hoped it did. And before he moved on to Notre Dame, you go out and you have to replace Jeff Hafley, who was a great hire. You go and get Kerry Combs for round 2 with him. Doesn't really work out as well. Now you bring in Jim Knowles and you feel like you're back on the right track. You've got, a guy who coached Sauce Gardner at Cincinnati as your secondary coach, a guy who coached Jalen Ramsey as your cornerbacks coach. It feels like the development may pick up again, but I think that development and that, like you talk about that gap closing, it's not in recruiting. I mean, we've heard that. I think somebody famous has said that stars matter. But I think that development, when you bring up Ohio State and Michigan, is that Jim Harbaugh is a much more experienced head coach. He knew who to hire for development. And Ryan Day, he's only been a head coach for 4 years. And so the development may not be there, but it's going to be, I think, as it's more experience.
And I said that about Kirby Smart before he got over the hump to win his first national title. People kept comparing him to Nick Saban or comparing him to these other guys. And Kirby Smart's first year as a head coach was 2016. And so when he's, in 2018, just getting hammered with questions about the fake punt against Alabama in the SEC title game, or in 2019, getting hammered out, how come you can never have an effective offense? How come you can't develop a quarterback? Blah, 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 blah. Well, he was a pretty young head coach. Yeah. Like, he's answered those questions now. And I think Ryan Day will get a chance to answer those questions. He's obviously had a really good start. I mean, most people would take that as a start to their head coaching career, but the situation he found himself in, obviously huge things were expected of him. So he's got to do that. But they've got to get better defensively in terms of the big play. I was looking at some stats today before we came on, and I was fascinated by this one. So if you look at Ohio State in terms of big plays allowed, like 10 plus yards, plays of 10 plus yards, they were one of the better teams in the country at not allowing plays of 10 plus yards. I think they were sixth in the country at fewest plays of 10 plus yards allowed, but they were 115th in the country in terms of fewest plays of 40 plus yards allowed. So it's not the mid-range chunks that are killing them. It's the Michigan game. It's those two bombs that just killed him.
Yeah, it's the fact that, I think
Cornelius Johnson. That's who I'm sorry. I'm blanking on Cornelius Johnson's name.
Yeah, in the Michigan game, I think Michigan had 20 rushing yards at halftime, and it was averaging, I think, less than a yard a carry. And even in the second half, it was either 1 yard or 70 yards for Donovan.
Yeah.
It was either a 2-yard out for J.J. McCarthy to one of his receivers or a busted coverage 80-yard touchdown against Georgia. Kenny McIntosh had a couple of decent chunk runs, but it was largely 1 and 2 yards against a good offensive line at Georgia. Mm-hmm. And then Arian Smith going 76 yards because Lathan Ransom falls down. And we remember that so well. So that's a great point. It's just so weird. Jim Knowles said last year, and this was a quote with just local media, that he's okay with giving up a couple chunk plays if that means shutting an offense down largely over the course of a game. And I think at Oklahoma State, that probably works. But at Ohio State, when you're playing in these high leverage games against the Michigans and the Georgias, I don't think that approach works. And I think he's since tinkered that. And you might see that a little differently where they don't tolerate those big plays as much this year as maybe they tried to last year. It ended up biting.
Yeah. And I think Georgia's another good example of this. And they obviously got torched against Ohio State. That's the most talent offensively that they played all season. But look at what they did against Tennessee, which really just killed every other defense they played. They kept everything in front of them. They're like, you can have 8 yards. We're just not going to give you 80. And that's how you beat a team like that. And the best offenses right now are like that. And you have to be able to bend and not break. And, you may give up yards, but as long as you're not giving up those just gut punch plays that change games, I think that helps. And Jim Knowles is a smart guy. He's been a lot of places. He's got more talent that he's never had to work with. So that tweak that you're talking about, I think could be very effective for them, because there may be times where you do give up the 10-yard play, the 15-yard play, but then that drive ends in a field goal because they couldn't string together enough of those.
Yeah.
And then instead of a touchdown on a 50-yard play, that changes the entire look of the game.
Yeah, it's the Notre Dame, Ohio State defense against Notre Dame last year versus the Ohio State defense against Michigan and Georgia last year. Just two completely different ordeals there. I guess that leads me into my next question for you. As we just try to get a little bit of a national picture here about Ohio State for the Buckeyes fans, it's like, do you see the defense being the thing that could hold this team back, or do you think that it's lack of experience with quarterback or offensive line? Or if there's one thing that you can pencil in of like, well, I think this might hold Ohio State back this year, what is it?
No, it's the defense. I'm not worried about the offense at all. I'm really not. And whether it's Kyle McCord or Devin Brown, and it certainly seems like Kyle McCord is the one who they're trending toward. They've got more receivers to throw to than anybody in the country.
Yeah,
I mean, it's crazy how deep they've been able to. And Hartline, like at this point, if you're a top 5 receiver in the country, and Brian Hartline comes to you and says, "I'd like you to come play for me," you're going to go play for him. Like there's not even a debate about that. So I think that part is going to take care of itself. They're going to be able to move the ball. Their backs are good. The line, I don't worry about as much because, again, they've been getting that sort of talent all along. There are very few schools that can recruit plug and play offensive line talent, NFL bodies every single year. It's really only 3 or 4. It's Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, LSU does it too. That's about it. So that's why I don't worry as much about them. Now, like Michigan's a different story. They've not necessarily gotten the highest rated recruits, but with Sharon Moore there, he's turning them into NFL guys. But Ohio State has those top end guys like Paris Johnson last year. Like when they really blossom, you're looking at a top 10 pick.
Yeah. So that the defense is just, it's so interesting to me that if they take a step forward, you could be talking about a national title contender. But
oh yeah,
if they take a step forward, but the quarterback play isn't at the CJ Stroud level, I think there will still be some questions about this team. And so that's the funny
thing. But here's the thing: if let's say it's Jay, it doesn't matter who it is, but let's say it's McCord, and he is a few notches below CJ Stroud. If the defense is better, they're still going to beat everybody on their schedule. Now, maybe when you get to a Georgia or an Alabama, or we'll see if Clemson's in the play, somebody like that, you may need a better performance out of your quarterback. But I think on their schedule, they can beat everybody without that quarterback having to be Superman. I mean, Alabama's in the same boat this year. Yeah. Alabama's the same thing. They have talent everywhere. They have no idea what their quarterback situation is going to look like. But they can probably still beat everybody they play. And then you see what happens if they get to the SEC championship game and see Georgia.
Yeah. And you kind of just roll the dice from there. And I think that is the case for Ohio State, just maybe 1 week earlier, just because of the Michigan thing. Last thing before I let you get out of here. We've talked about Ohio State and Michigan a lot. The Buckeyes go on the road in November. We never stop talking about that game in Columbus. It's a rite of passage. We have to, and we like to. It's interesting to me that Michigan is already favored. We know what the talent looks like. What we don't know what the quarterback situation looks like for Ohio State. We know what the talent looks like at Michigan. That's very defined. Like just a few months out, early Ohio State versus Michigan. Like, what are your thoughts on that in July? Because we have to give thoughts in July, not just the week before the game starts.
I would like to see them play once or twice before I come up with a definitive line on the game. But it comes down to the same, all this stuff we've been talking about. You subtract 2 or 3 big plays from that game for Michigan's offense, and Ohio State wins that game. That is what they have to do.
Yeah.
I am not worried about Ohio State moving the ball against anybody. I think they're going to be capable of moving the ball against everybody. What I'm worried about is somebody just torching them one day. And that's not just unique to Ryan Day's teams. Urban's teams had days like that too, like the Purdue game a few years ago, where it's just like, where did this come from? So there haven't been, it actually feels like there haven't been as many of those in the Ryan Day era. It's been, against Michigan that's happened, or it's been in the playoff. And so there haven't been the just head scratcher, what happened here situations. But if they could just reduce the, oh my God, everything just changed plays, I think they're very capable of beating Michigan. And Michigan's going to try to beat them up. One thing I thought Michigan did really well in that game last year, it wasn't just the big plays. They were wearing Ohio State down. You talk about how little they could gain in the first half. Like the long Edwards run, even if he hadn't busted that one, if you look at the runs around it and kind of the way it was trending, it might have been 5 yards, 8 yards, 7 yards, down the field at that point, because they had just gassed Ohio State's defense. But again, if they can just tighten that up a little bit, get off the field when their offense is clicking, build a lead, force teams to play. Like, you force Michigan to play from behind 2 touchdowns, that's going to be very difficult for them to overcome. And that's what they just let them stay too close. And again, it's a tackling at the end of the season, toughness at the end of the season, that it feels almost like what we talk about with USC and the Lincoln Riley Oklahoma teams. Like, it's not that bad defensively, not like, say, like the 2018 Oklahoma defense. That was horrific, but it feels like it's just the one thing holding them back, because they have the offense, they have the coaching on the offense, the play calling, they have the personnel on both sides of the ball, they have the special teams play, like they have everything else.
Yeah. I just remember last year, it's 7-3, and Ohio State has the ball and kicks a field goal to make it 10-3, and then you give up the big play and it's 10-10 instead of 14-3. You've got a chance to make it 24-10, and instead of doing that, you make it, you don't, and
right.
It's just a matter.
And Michigan, as they're currently constructed, if they're within one score of you, you got a problem.
Yeah, well, and Georgia almost the same way. Georgia was within 2 scores. Ohio State kicks a field goal on the Marvin Harrison Jr. injury drive instead of, getting the ball at the 1 yard line after a potential targeting and punching it in to go up 3 scores. And you think, okay, Georgia's right back in. And so, all of those issues on the defense, but then you look at these little things where the offense didn't quite do what it should have done, and it caused some issues. And so,
but listen, I cannot kill them. Like the offense performance in the Peach Bowl, they did you score that many points against Georgia, your offense has done really well. That's not, we can nitpick, but really ultimately we should not be criticizing that. That was a defensive lapse. One stop and Ohio State wins that game and is probably the national champ right now. And again, I do think these offseason conversations would be very different if that's the case.
And I think that's probably what drives the folks watching this video the most insane, is knowing one stop away from a national championship.
One stop.
And it might even hurt a little bit more than 2019 and 2015 when they were a couple of 50-50 calls against Clemson from playing against LSU. 2015, you're a few Zeke Elliott carries away from being in the playoff and maybe being back-to-back.
Wait. He was on the team in the second half of the Michigan State game that year?
I'll have to check.
I mean, I know he did an interview after the game, but it seemed like they forgot he was there. So just making sure.
Yeah, then we wouldn't have had to watch Michigan State against Alabama in the 2015 college football.
Well, I covered the Michigan-Ohio State game the following week, where they actually seemed like they took Zeke's advice and things looked a little different. So
yeah, that was not a good time for Michigan. The last 2 years have been a good time for Michigan. Ohio State trying to get back on the other side of that rivalry. A lot of good conversation here, Andy. Just fun to hear, an opinion outside of Columbus, just because these fans, they hear the Ohio State side of it just so much. And we got to, not really a reality check, but just see what the outside has to say.
Well, I feel like I'm a little bit different, though, in terms of the most national people when it comes to how they feel on this. And because I'm not going to say, don't be upset about losing to Michigan 2 years in a row. I get you're upset and I know why, and I understand it. And I've dealt with enough really good programs over the years that the expectation should be different at a place that's always really good. There's nothing wrong with that. They've done a great job creating a program that deserves to have these expectations. So it's up to the people who are very highly paid to make sure they meet them. It's not wrong to hold people to a high standard when you've given them the resources to do what they need to do. And I would say Ohio State's done that at every turn.
I saw a thread from you, actually not a tweet, but a thread from you where you threaded a picture of Marvin Harrison Jr. as a player you're excited to watch. 50 days until that happens, Andy. You get to watch Marvin Harrison Jr. in 50 days.
I was so heartbroken when he got hurt in the Peach Bowl, because he was having one of the best games I've ever seen anyone have. And I cannot wait to see him. Hopefully healthy for a whole season with Emeka Egbuka, right there. I don't know what you do if you're an opposing defensive coordinator and you don't have Georgia talent.
Yeah,
that's probably why Ohio State is going to be in the mix again.
And he might have his high school quarterback throwing to him, which makes it even more interesting if Kyle McCord wins that job.
That's right. And hey, look, I think Heisman voters wised up with Devontae Smith, realizing he was the secret sauce of that Alabama team. So I think the seal's kind of been broken on another receiver having a really good chance to win it. I think, people are going into the season looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. as the best player on that Ohio State offense and maybe the best overall player in the country.
Yeah, with Caleb Williams winning it last year, it's hard to see him winning it a second time. And so that kind of opens the door again for Marvin.
Caleb's got everything you want, but we're going to nitpick Caleb Williams to death. Yeah. Caleb Williams is awesome. I bet he could have a better season than last year and maybe not win it, because he's got the two problems of he's a returning Heisman Trophy winner. 2, he's the presumed number 1 pick in the NFL draft. So that group, the draftniks, are just going to be picking him apart every single game.
Absolutely.
So it'll be fun to watch though, because there's so many good, like this is the kind of thickest Heisman list going into the season that I've seen, and who knows, it'll probably be somebody we're not even talking about.
Just beginning to scratch the surface on the preseason college football hype just surrounding the entire season. We're excited for it. Andy Staples is excited for the other side of that screen. Andy, appreciate you joining me. Thank you so much. The Lettermen Row viewers probably going to love this. We're going to have you back on before the season starts because we got a lot more to break down with the Buckeyes.
Anytime.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here, Andy. Thanks for joining us, Lettermen Row viewers. We will see you guys back for another edition of the Offseason Report. We'll see you guys then.